We're definitely looking at how to build generational wealth, in particular in the context of dealing with black tax and what's known as the sandwich generation. I'm joined in studio by my two guests, Nonhlanhla Nxele, who is the founder and CEO of Esteemed Financial Solutions, as well as Esteemed Learning Academy. She's also a mother, she's a financial planner, and she's got over 13 years of experience in the financial services space, assisting people in bettering their futures and planning for their futures in sustainable ways. And next to her, I'm joined by a family favorite of Moneyweb, as well as many other stations. You guys might know him as a chartered accountant, an activist, a columnist, a social media influencer. To me, he's just someone who started out as a mentor, a lecturer, became a friend, and is now someone who is highly sought after in this media space. Khaya Sithole, of course. Good morning to both of my guests. Thank you very much for the time. I guess let me start off with you, Noni. When we look at the idea of generational wealth, what are we looking at? Are we just looking at looking after your children? Is it just a conversation about saving up a little bit of money so that you can retire comfortably? What are we looking at there?
Let's start by understanding what is this generational wealth. It is really having to transfer your financial assets to your family members, children, or even grandchildren, and beyond. So it's not only on your children only, or your own children. It is within the family. There are family members where they are taking care of their uncles, their aunts, and so forth, and their niece. Personally, I'm taking care of my niece and my nephews. So I need to make sure that I take care of them and I take care of their future. So you start now while they're still young, put something together for them, save up for them, for their education, for their future, to make sure that they have a better life when they've grown up.
And we know that this comes with challenges. I mean, we know that first of all, the challenge of saving is a significant one. And alongside those challenges, I suppose one of the ones that we're aiming to tackle here as well is the challenge that comes with what we know as black tax. And I'd like to bring you in on this, Khaya. I mean, let's explore this idea of black tax and look at what's known as the sandwich generation. I mean, how do we coin the sandwich generation? Which generation does it refer to? And this idea of black tax, I mean, what does it mean for us that are looking to build wealth and to build savings for people in our families?
I actually thought we were in a practice session, but it turns out that we already started. Yeah, so...
Yeah, don't worry.
Actually, I thought we were in a practice session. So obviously the sandwich generation are the individuals who've got the dual responsibility of taking care of the elder and the younger. So South Africa has got unique problems, and the essence of the South African problem is that South African citizens tend to migrate across different forms of poverty. So for a lot of people that are born without means and resources, born poor by definition, the one way in which that poverty is alleviated is through some various forms of social assistance. So if you're born and you get a child foster grant and you get access to free education and free healthcare, that deals with that form of poverty, it mitigates it. Unfortunately, what then happens is that when you reach a certain age, you then migrate out of that system. So you no longer have access to basic education because you're too old. You no longer have access to a childcare grant because you're no longer a child. And the problem comes in that particular time frame between the ages of 18 all the way up to 60. Yeah. Where unless you have a job, unless you've been able to migrate into the economy, you're now subjected to a form of economic poverty. In other words, the only way the poverty can be alleviated is for you to participate in the economy. And then what we see afterwards is that when you get older and you qualify for an old age grant, you're back into the whole social poverty dimension where you're still poor, but there's a mitigation, which is the pension grant that you get. Unfortunately, the design of the social care system in South Africa was not actually designed for the times that we're in the sense that when you look at then the depth of the assistance itself, we've got particular problems. So in South Africa, we do not start off by saying that what are the needs of a particular individual and then map out what those needs are going to cost and then say this amount of money. We simply say this amount of money that we're going to allocate to you and then you say you hope for the best, right? Mm-hmm. So what that means is that by the time people get to an older age, the social assistance is itself not enough. So what you then have is that the people that are in the middle, that have been lucky enough to be able to participate in the economy, not only have to take care of the younger ones because there is lack of sufficient coverage for the young ones and also the old ones. So they're sort of sandwiched in between those forms of poverty. But the problem here is that there are far too many citizens, even within that middle, who cannot access the economy themselves. So what you then see is that we're not actually taking care of the young and the older, we're extracting from them. So if I am a mother and I'm unemployed and my child gets a grant, well, the loaf of bread that I buy isn't just uniquely for the child, it's for the child and myself. So we're now actually diminishing even the currency of that grant in the child's hands. Same thing with our old people, whether it's our grandmothers or grandfathers, we're actually extracting from them because, well, we don't have anything, and what little they do get has to then get stretched across. So we've got very, very unique dimensions in South Africa, and I think it's something that probably reflects the I wouldn't say the poor design, but the accidental design of our social healthcare system, because it doesn't start off by saying, what are the needs? It simply starts off by saying, these are the resources, the needs better match the resources.
Yeah. And more often than not, as you rightly mentioned, those needs far outweigh the resources that are deployed to that. And I mean, to the point around the black tax side of it is, it's not necessarily that we opt to go down this route by choice. So for a lot of people that are caught in that middle, it is an involuntary thing where you cannot afford to see a parent suffer, a parent that sacrificed everything they had to raise you. At the same time, you want to provide a better future for your child or the people that are dependent on you.
So the issue in South Africa is that we call it a black tax, but it's actually a social solidarity tax. And the reason it's a social solidarity tax is that as society, as I've just mentioned, the multiple forms of poverty that we get subjected to. If you have, for example, not been able to secure a stable job, even in that middle period between the ages of 18 and 64, it means that you do not have enough savings to carry you into your old age. It means that even the state pension is not going to be adequate, right? And we do know that historically, the majority of black citizens didn't have jobs within that 18 to 64 bracket. So the prevalence and the density of what needs to be done is much more acute for black people, so that's why we call it a black tax. So the argument is not to say that other races do not take care of their parents and they do not take care of their young. They do, but it just tends to happen because, and far more of those particular race groups have been able to participate in the economy. It means that the need that the old white parents have for assistance from their own children is much less than the need that you and I will be subjected to. So of course, it's a tax that acutely affects black people, so that's why we call it a black tax. But there's a social solidarity problem wherever you look, across all races. But for those that have been able to participate meaningfully in the economy for an extended period of time, and they realize that they've saved enough or they've got a very strong enough pension pot, then of course the need and the extractive nature of it is not as acute. So that's why we sort of tend to think of it as something that only happens to black people, but it actually manifests across all races. And for as long as black people have got a very artificial and a superficial participation in the economy, this will be perpetuated for as long as we live.
Thanks for that point of clarity on the fact that it is a social tax that affects everybody. It might be more prevalent to certain individuals, but it does affect everybody. And that being said, I mean, Noni, where do we then look for this wealth building? I mean, where do we start? Because we know that the problem is there. We've identified how systemic the problem can be and how damaging the problem can become if it's not dealt with and addressed. So those that are able to then participate in the economy, where do you then start from an income point of view, from a generational point of view, to start to build that generational wealth?
Honestly speaking, most people find us that there's that one breadwinner who's employed, and whatever that they have, it's not enough to take care of the rest of the family. So therefore, it's then important then to start talking about creating other streams of income, right? And when we talk about other streams of income, we're then referring to start thinking about the side hustle that you can come up with. And I always tell people to say, when you talk about a side hustle, it starts with something that you've got passion about, something that you really love to do. I'll give an example for one of my friends. He's in the financial services. He's a manager in one of the insurance company. And for him, what he did, he said, I love photography. I like to take pictures. And I said, why don't you get the equipment, and see what you can do? And he started with that. He got the equipment, he started taking pictures, obviously for free. I was one of these free clients to do the pictures. And then he started building a portfolio that he was able now to market himself as a side hustle. So every weekend he's now getting weekend gigs. that he's getting paid for. And those are the small things that you can do. Personally, what I did when I was still employed, before running my business, I opened up a laundromat, Ekasi, and people thought, what is this girl doing? Why are you opening up a laundromat, you know? And guess what? Since 2012, it's still operating. My mom is running it. My niece and my nephew knows how to operate it. So that is some of the things that you keep teaching your family to do. There's small things that you can, because even with him, he doesn't just do it by himself. He's got his kids as well. He goes with his kids to do these things. So you build that by working on the side hustle that you've got passion for, that is able to involve the family as well, so that they can take over whenever you're not there. The other option is to look into your rental incomes, and someone would say, where will I get the money to really buy property, because property is expensive? But sometimes it's because we are looking at those high market properties that are going for millions and so forth. Only to find out there's also opportunities where you can actually go to an auction and buy a Kasi house, you know. Some of them can get it for 70, 100K. You put that together, you save up for a good 6 to 12 months, have that lump sum, go to an auction, buy that property, fix it up, and there we go. You've got a lifetime income coming in. So those are the small things as people that can start working on. And of course, the other way, someone said, definitely, Noni, I cannot do this. What else can I do? Then you can start thinking of an investment. Because there you are getting an interest income that will also be building within your income, which we call it like a compounding interest. So we can start small, putting that small 500 Rand into different investment vehicles and see what for a long time. The thing is, our people like to say, I'm putting money away in an investment. 6 months down the line, they want to come and take it off, you know. So it's important to keep on your long-term strategy. Keep on that long-term plan and stay in it, so that you can definitely see the results of that generational wealth. Yeah.
So I'm getting a sense that a large component of it is diversifying your reliance on one income stream and sort of starting
100%.
to build out multiple income streams in an effort to balance out what Khaya mentioned around the fact that when you participate in the economy, you're
Yes.
participating in a limited capacity. So expand your participation
100%.
in the economy to ensure that the different income streams or whatever you're building on the side then becomes an add-on to what you already have.
Yes.
Let's stick with the investment side of it. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of the types of investment vehicles or investment strategies that are appropriate for wealth building? Because I get the sense that something like a fixed deposit might not necessarily cut it if you can deploy the capital better elsewhere.
Yeah, so there's different kind of investment platforms. For the lack of a word, I just put it like flexible investments. In the term of the industry, they call it LISP platforms, which is your linked investment service providers. It's basically a combination of unit trusts where you can really start with like I said, you can start with a minimum of 500 Rand, put that together. It is then important then where you partner now with a certified financial planner that's going to be able to put together portfolios that will speak to the short, medium, and long term to make sure that you're able to achieve those goals according to that. So there's those flexible investments. There's also your tax-free accounts that you can also use for long term, not just only for yourself, but also for your kids' education. You can use those kind of platforms. It will definitely help you for a long term. Yeah.
Just a reminder, I mean, you can send us your questions to the panel on the YouTube chat box, or you can email it to events@moneyweb.co.za. You can use the hashtag BetterInvestor. Khaya, I want to come to you. How do we then, now we know sort of, or we've got an idea of the types of instruments or the types of vehicles or the plan to go about this. Another component of this has to be conversations. You mentioned earlier that for a long time, certain individuals have been excluded from participating in the economy, and the historic issues that we've had to deal with. How have those issues played into where we are now, and how important is it to have conversations with family members or with your family regarding these sorts of financial situations and setting up things and explaining to someone, hey, you're my child, I've set up a trust for you. Yeah. How important are those conversations to be had?
Well, they are very important for the very few people that can afford to have them, no pun intended. And the reality here is that very few South Africans have any form of discretionary income. We've got a very low savings culture as a country across the board. And the reason we've ended up here is that in a normal nuclear family, you're unlikely to find that every single person within the family has got an income. And of course, it means that those that have an income have to spread it so much wider. And the consequence of that is that savings then doesn't become an instinctive reaction. And also, even in instances where there is an element of discretionary income to be put away, it is on a very fragile model, as you said, where 6 months later, then there's a pressing need in order to be able to activate that and withdraw it. So we do not have that culture of long-term horizon thinking. And one of the ways in which we can obviously start addressing that is by making sure that many more people are in an income earning capacity. And when they do earn an income, that income is sufficient. Because until there is an income to be saved, then there's no point in us talking about savings. But I think also then there's a question of the education about which instruments are desirable for which type of planning. So we do know, quite ironically, that funeral insurance is a popular thing in the black community. And one of the ironies is that we've seen a funeral. Everybody knows what it costs to plan a funeral. So there's a sense of visibility associated with the fact that there's a linear link between, oh, if I put this away, I'll be able to do that. For other type of investment opportunities, I've never seen somebody, getting a lump sum because no one talks about it. So for a lot of people, it's much more difficult to sell the idea to them to say, well, actually, if you put this away, then this is what's going to happen in the long run, and this is why you're in a better off position. And it also doesn't help that, look, if something goes wrong, then the state will step in. So a lot of people are like, hi, the future will take care of itself.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to start reorientating people differently. There's also another point that I'd like to raise, in that when we talk about generational wealth, South Africa still has a gap in the monetization of the wealth that we have. So if I go back to the Bundus, back in KZN, we've got huge amounts of land. If you want to build a house, I can give you a parcel of land. That huge amount of land doesn't have a financial value. So if I say that I want to go and get a loan, it's not in my name. It's literally just the Sithole family land, as it were. So we don't associate it with any singular individual. But if I want to build a house, then I'm able to do so. When I'm here in Johannesburg and I've got like a fraction of that fraction of the land has got a piece of paper that underpins it. So therefore, that fraction of that land has been monetized. I can then use it to go and get access onto income earning opportunities, for example. So that lack of monetization of the wealth that people in South Africa have is a bit of a problem itself, because it may well turn out that comparatively, the fact that I know that I've got a piece of land that I will inherit in 10 or 15 years' time means that I've got a form of wealth. But I cannot document it anywhere, because it's not going to be something that I go home and say, guys, put this on a piece of paper that this piece of land he will inherit, and this is how much it's worth. So that's a form of intergenerational wealth, but we haven't quantified it and we haven't captured it. So we've limited ourselves to simply saying that the only forms of wealth that we understand, the only forms of wealth that we account for are the wealth that is a form of wealth that has been formalized. But a lot of us actually do have a form of generational wealth in terms of either the cattle that we're going to inherit or the resources that we're going to inherit, and the simple fact that I don't have to pay rent back at home, which is the greatest thing for me. So we need to find ways of actually being able to articulate exactly what people have and how to sort of figure out how to talk about it so that people understand exactly what it is that we talk about when we talk about generational wealth, and simply not limited to the type of system that far too many of them find so elusive because they just don't have income earning opportunities.
Yeah. And I think to your point on the land side of it and that sort of thing, we are often told that it doesn't hold value because it's not near a mall, it's not near a Sandton, it's not near a developed area. And if you come back to what you were mentioning earlier, Noni, about the fact that you can utilize that resource to do something else with it. You can farm the cattle, you can build an agricultural business, you can start something completely new, and that will add value not only to yourself but to the economy. I think what you're saying, Khaya, about the fact that we need to understand that it does hold value, even if it's not a quantified value that's assessed by a commercial bank that's sitting in Santon Drive and that sort of thing.
So one of the problems is that when people talk about value, they're trying to sort of think about resale value. So when they say that it doesn't have value because it's not next to a mall, it simply says, well, if you try to sell it to Jimmy won't pay much for it. But my intention is not to sell my family home. My intention is to be able to occupy it and not have to pay to occupy some other form of land. So for me, that is the value. That's the implicit value, in that I do not have to otherwise bleed cash on an ongoing basis, which is what I have to do if I move to Johannesburg, if I move move to Durban or if I move to Cape Town. So that for me is the implicit value that, again, a lot of people tend to not actually appreciate that it exists there. And I think why we need to be able to sort of, sensitize ourselves to this is that if we're then going to start crafting conversations about how to then build, additional financial wealth, for example, which in other words is a bank account, if you can simplify it like that, then we need to be able to say that this is the starting point, this is what we currently have, but what we need to be able to do is to generate ongoing or recurring cash flows in order for us to be able to do additional things. So once we then figure out what it is that we're trying to do, then we look at the opportunities that exist and then say, okay, what are the best ways of ensuring that what little we do earn as an income, a part of it is still being put away for a rainy day, because obviously over a long term there are always going to be particular issues, whether it's marriages or whether it's death or particular events like that that are going to require us to have some form of physical cash. And it's the classic case study that I used to talk about, the case of the Transnet pipeline. Does it have any value? Well, Transnet is not allowed to sell it, but does it make it worthless? No, it's not worthless. And in accounting terms, we used to struggle with the question of how do you associate a value, and what's the point of telling people that it's worth $1 billion, it will never be sold, it will never be transferred. So that value, that number, what is the meaning of it all? And we need to be able to understand what we're trying to say when we talk about these numbers, when we talk about these values and the essence of what wealth is.
No, your thoughts on this? I mean, from the perspective that Khaya just mentioned around the fact that what we see as value needs to be redefined firstly, but also in conversation we need to then redefine the plan for that value. We need to outline what we intend to do with it.
100%. And that's why communication is very key. I will call it family meeting is very key. To sit down and have these kind of conversations to say, guys, this is what I've built now. I want you guys to be involved. I want you to make sure that you take care of this legacy, The same way that, like I said earlier on, referring to the laundromat, to say, the kids know about the business, the kids are involved, they participate on weekends and during school holidays. They know how it operates, so that even if when Gogo is not there, even if when Auntie is not there, they will take care of it and they will continue, because that's an income that was coming home, right? And then Khaya mentioned about the land back home. You can do so much with that land. Yes, it might not have value, and trust in me, I do have clients where I tell them to put it on their wills, to say this land based in this area must be able to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for my children, so that when they start reading that will, the kids now open up other ways of thinking to say, actually, dad or mom wanted us to do this. We must not sell the cows, we must not sell the goats and so forth, and take care of the wealth that he had created. So it's then important then to make sure that that family meeting is being held and it's been discussed to say, guys, this is what I've put in place. Make sure that you implement it accordingly, because I did put it on my will and you need to take care of it.
I guess we've got a question from Lungani in Randburg asking, how do you teach young children about the different financial educational tools whilst maintaining family values? What's the best practice there, Noni?
So it's that again from you as a family to say, what are the family values, right? Do we value money or do we value creating wealth? Because there's a difference there, So I then say that it's then important to teach them at a very early age, because I can tell you now, my daughter, she knows that when she has worked, done something, she's rewarded by cash to put it away. And then there's also money to spend. So it starts when they're still young. You teach them with different principles to say, I need to learn to save my money, because we've got a competition at home with all the children where we say every December, let's put all your savings here. Who is the winner? And then we reward them accordingly. So those are the small things that you build in, and they enjoy, because now in December they know they've saved up. They're able to buy the best toys that they wanted, because you can't always be buying what they want. So you say, put up the money for you to get what you want. And that, it's a principle that you're teaching them and making sure that at the end of the day, they are learning these basic principles at a very young age.
Teach them young and teach them how to save. Xolani wants to know, what's your take on stokvels as a savings vehicle in the black community, given that we're talking about savings, Khaya?
It's a tricky one. And I think, the one thing about stokvels is that conceptually they've been designed as short-term, put-away systems rather than long-term saving systems. In that in December, we know that there's a meeting and then we buy the groceries or we simply distribute the money. So it is a missed opportunity in that we've simply restricted it to the 12-month horizon. And also because we've restricted to the 12-month horizon, the financial system hasn't been conducive into giving it more attractive interest rates, for example, because it's not a long-term fixed deposit. They know very well that, the shorter the time frame for the investment, the more poor the interest rate is. But if we said that these were 5-year stokvels, for example, I think the returns would be much better, would be much more tangible. So I do think it represents a missed opportunity. And perhaps, again, it comes back to the question of we do not have enough to put away, because if we had enough to put away, we could then say in our stokvel that, look, half of it is going to be distributed in December so that everybody can be able to have a good Christmas, and then the remainder is part of this long-term thing. But that obviously requires people to commit to be part of this for a very long term, and that's not always easy to guarantee because of the very informal nature of what our stokvel systems are. So I do think it represents a missed opportunity.
I have to agree with you there. I mean, there's so much that can be said about the discipline and the culture that a stokvel can breed in terms of looking at a culture of saving, a culture of thinking forward, a culture of looking to beyond just the now. And stokvels are definitely a missed opportunity from that respect. I have to agree with you there. We've got a comment from Moneyweb who says, I hope investment companies are listening to get an idea on advertising to the black market. Make it visual, show long-term benefits. And that's something that Khaya said, is if you're able to visualize and you're able to see the end goal the same way you were able to for a funeral policy, for example, you might have a different view on how this whole picture plays out. But looking at this wealth side of it, I mean, we have to look at something that we spoke about at the start of the conversation as well, around the liquidity of that. Let's look at the liquidity of it all, Khaya. We know that something that Noni alluded to earlier is the diversification of income streams and that sort of thing. From a liquidity point of view, how important is it to have that liquidity? You mentioned something around the fact that at certain times, family emergencies come up, unforeseen events come up, and how important is it to balance, even though you have a long-term generational view, to make sure that for the short term you have liquidity so that you don't dip into that long-term side of things?
The importance of liquidity is illustrated by how robust the credit market and the mashonisa market is in South Africa. Because obviously, if people were sufficiently liquid, they wouldn't rely on those. Yeah. I saw something truly disturbing yesterday on Twitter, in that one of the banks has now created an advance system for grants. In other words, you can, if they know that you qualify for a grant, you receive a grant per month, you can then go and ask them to give you the money before the grant gets paid out. Sure. I think it's remarkably dangerous, but it's also reflective of the sense of desperation that emanates from a lack of liquidity. So people's expenses do not necessarily wait for that particular payment date. And if there's been an interruption in their cash flow, so you can plan for 30 days, but if something happens, there's an injury or an unexpected trip or a death in the family, then it interrupts your cash flow. So in the absence of liquidity, you then have to go for these alternative systems, where that's tapping into the credit market, but for a lot of people, they do not actually have access to the credit market because of their poor incomes or their irregular incomes or a lack of a job, where the credit market is going to ask, where is your 3-month pay slip and all things like that. Very few South Africans can actually be able to provide that. So it drives them towards that particular market out of a sense of desperation. And also, unfortunately, the unintended consequence of us excluding people from the credit market is that you then amplify the exploitation, because, trust me, there's always a mashonisa willing to give you the amount of money that you need. But the type of interest rates that we hear about, I mean, in spite of the fact that the National Credit Act was signed into law in 2005, the National Credit Act doesn't mean a lot much to a lot of people, because out of a sense of desperation, if she says that you want 100 Rand, you must bring back 200 Rand next week, you're going to do it. That's literally what happens. And as soon as you pay her the 200 Rand, it means that you're now cash poor, and then you have to go to Jimmy and ask for another 200 Rand. So it actually perpetuates a cycle, and once you get trapped in it, you hardly ever get out. And there was was one interesting anecdote that happened in my village a couple of years ago, where someone died and a whole lot of people celebrated. It turned out that the person who died was a mashonisa who didn't keep a formal ledger. So when he died, everybody knew that they were absolved from their credit. So yeah, that is what happens there. Yeah.
I think that's a very scary thing that you've just outlined around the fact that you can now get an advance against your social grant, because we know you've gotten an advance against your airtime and those sorts of things. And some companies, I don't know if a lot of companies still do an advance against your salary. But essentially what that is you're living in debt, because when your salary does eventually come in, you have to settle the advance, which means you now don't have that 30-day window that you had initially, and you're going to be repeating that borrowing cycle. I mean, I think if anything, the only real thing that makes sense for an advance may be a bonus if you don't have intended plans for that bonus, and you can then use that to offset against some of the things that you have. But what that's going to do is you're now, with this whole cycle that we're going through, you're perpetuating a cycle where people's bonuses are only going to go filling gaps and not building wealth and maintaining these sorts of things. So then, Noni, what do we do to maintain the liquidity? Do you have an emergency fund? How do you then make sure that the liquidity that you're maintaining doesn't, one, distract you from the long-term goals that you have, but two, is readily available for you to not have to go to the mashonisa that you hope passes away very quickly?
I would say that personally, I always have two emergency funds. One, it starts with the bank. Put something away that when you have an immediate need, you can tap into that, versus to using the credit facility. And I know it's not easy, but it's that mentality of putting that 250 away, 200 Rand and so forth, and start accumulating that 1 month worth of a salary. Put it there, keep it there for that immediate need. And then there's also the second one, where I say now, put together an emergency fund for a good 3 to 6 months that speaks to your personal monthly expenses. Because you don't want to find yourself, when you've got that immediate need, you tap into that, because you are saying only when you've got a challenge with you losing your job and so forth, you've got that 6 months worth of salary being saved up, and you don't have to find yourself going back to the credit facility and asking for money. And it's quite challenging, because people ask themselves, how do I do it? How do I access money to make sure that I can start saving up? I always tell people to say, it all boils down to say, how do you maintain and manage your money on a monthly basis? When the salary comes in, what do you do with your money? Do you record what you do? Do you know where you spend your money, so that you don't end up finding yourself spending your money somewhere else where you don't even know what you've done with it? And it boils down to the budget. Do you do the budget to make sure that you've got a portion in your budget, you've got a savings option to make sure that there's a debit order going off, you know that it's going to help you out whenever there's a need.
We've got a question from Mtobisi saying, are there comprehensive information hubs online that we can pass to friends, family, and those within our community? Mtobisi doesn't think that there's enough or there's a need for multilingual financial education for us to teach and relay this information to older family members. Are there tools that are readily available, whether it's from a financial planning perspective or whether it's free resources? I know for one, Khaya puts out a whole host of helpful tweets every now and then on information that is public knowledge. A lot of it is articles that have been written, that have put out in the media. It's just about accessing those sorts of things. But are there specific platforms where we can get this information?
Personally, I do something similar to Khaya as well. I post educational information on my LinkedIn profile or Facebook pages. But there's also a website from the FPI, which is the Financial Planning Institute. They call it money123.co.za. You can actually go in there. There's quite a lot of content in there. They talk about budgets, investments, all kinds of articles that you can educate yourself with. So I think that platform can really help the public out there.
And of course, the Moneyweb app. I use the Moneyweb app. It's one of the most reliable resources, right? I found that a lot of the things that I've done in the media space as well, the Moneyweb app provides you with reliable content, reliable information, and often, and Khaya, I'd like you to weigh in on this, often the information we read in mass media, there's certain elements of it that's factually incorrect. And so you want a reliable source if you're going to educate yourself from factually correct resources.
Yeah, unfortunately, the unintended consequence of open access to information dissemination is that we do not have the strong filters that we need to have in order to vet the information. Ironically, it happened last week where one of the most prominent Sunday newspapers put out a tweet that said, oh, a few months ago, interest rates were at that particular rate, this is how much you're paying for your bond, now it's gone up so much, and this is how much you're paying for a bond. And they had a fundamental factual error in that they confused the repo rate to the prime rate, and it obviously just made the calculation completely much more dramatic than it needed to be. And of course, for a lot of people, if that was their only source of information, they'd be like, yo, actually, this financial system is just a problem because it can do that to people. So of course, that is the one platform where the filtering should have happened, but it didn't. It was only later, once people highlighted it, that they then corrected it. So we do have that particular question of the credibility of the sources, because the unfortunate consequence of financial information is that people may take decisions based on what they see, and if what they're seeing or what they're being told is factual isn't, then it actually leads to unintended consequences. We saw that I think it was a couple of years ago, where there was a DJ who was punting particular property investments, and I think the underlying fundamentals with, in that information were not as well ventilated as they needed to be. So people say, hi, if a DJ says you must do it, then you must do it.
Go for it.
And then later on, when the consequences happened, when the interest rate cycle changed, and then people found themselves out of pocket, people were like, how? But we thought this was reliable. And you're like, actually, I'm a DJ for a reason. I'm a financial planner for a reason. I'm an accountant for a reason. Sticking to lanes is occasionally important.
And I think to your point on sort of sticking to lanes as well, being quite important, you sort of see that this is now something that the regulators have taken on as well in terms of access to information, saying that the information that you provide, even as a social media influencer, you have to make sure that we're now going to hold you accountable for the information you provide. So make sure that the information is accurate.
Yeah. A lot of people don't actually appreciate the importance of regulation, because if I trust you as a person, if I trust you as a brand or as a human being, and then you punt something there, if I have faith in you, I will believe that, okay, this is the thing to go. Yeah. But if it turns out that you've never used the product, you're only simply being paid to promote the product, and I make decisions unaware of the fact that you actually have a financial incentive to tell me something in particular, then I'm actually being screwed over. So it's quite important for us to be very vigilant about how we regulate the dissemination of information, particularly if it affects people's finances, because once you've lost the money through the scammer, once you've responded to that Instagram DM that says, do you know how you can make 800,000 Rand profit within a week, that money is never recovered. There's enough evidence in front of us that Instagram scammers and crypto scammers are second only to churches in terms of fleecing people.
Yeah. And maybe just to add on that point, Jimmy, is to say it's important for people to verify as well when they're dealing with a particular person, to say where you registered, because the regulator has made it quite clear to say, to do certain things you must be licensed, to be able to give advice and so forth, you must be licensed. So we do get quite a lot of even older people as well, because they've heard somebody saying that from your retirement money, if you take the whole pension and put it here, then you will triple all your pension and you'll live for longer. That's where it goes wrong, because the first thing is to say, start with checking that person, are they regulated? Are they licensed to advise me according to the regulation?
Okay, so then in closing, 2 points from each of you, please, on what it is that is most important to look at from this whole wanting to ensure that you build a better life and a better future for your families and for those that you look after.
Okay, so I will say, start early to save. That is always the message that I would like to put across, to say, no matter whatever you have, as small as whatever rand amount you have, put it away. And also to say that educate yourself. There's quite a lot of information there so that you can actually make an informed decision. Okay.
I would say information is key. I think the ability to make the right decisions hinges on the quality of the insights that one has. And of course, one of the problems that we saw earlier on is that far too many of these tips, far too many of these lessons are not available in the languages that are accessible to a lot of people. So if English is not my first language and Afrikaans is not my first language, I struggle to get the same depth, the same volume of readily available information that will explain to me these things in a manner that then enables me to go and have that family conversation. Because if I can't articulate it myself, I'm not going to convene a family meeting in the evening to say, guys, this is what savings is if I don't understand it myself. This is what a unit trust is if I don't understand it myself. So there's a huge information gap that exists there, particularly on the question of making accessible to as many languages as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my guests, Nonhlanhla Nxele, as well as Khaya Sithole, for their insights on how to build intergenerational wealth, how to get around this trap of black tax, or as Khaya calls it, social tax, because it affects everybody, and most importantly, what steps to take in terms of ensuring that you put forward your best foot on behalf of your family and on behalf of those that depend on you. Please stay tuned to our sessions. We do have a session coming up now with Simon Brown as he chats to Harry Joffe around the importance of offshore investing.